Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you today about the Tripartite Agreement, and it's wonderful to see
so many of you.
We're going to try and make this as exciting as possible. And Laura and I both have a disclaimer about this particular topic, that this is a legal agreement and neither of us are lawyers.
You heard our bios, not lawyers. I'm a social worker, I'm not a lawyer.
So we'll do our best to answer your questions as we present, and have a notebook, so any questions that we're not able to answer, we will record those and try and get back to you as soon as possible with some good information. All right. So we developed today's presentation focused around the questions that we get most often, either at the EFCL or that the NRCs get from community leagues. So we don't have time to go over everything, but that's our focus today. And we're just going to tag team this, and we invite you to ask questions as we go along.
Laura, is your name spelled?
If it looks wrong, it's right. That's why it always trips up the staff and everyone that tries to say it. But if you know someone with that last name, I'm probably related to them, because there's not many people. So yeah, and as we kind of alluded to, and I chatted about in my last session, I mean, this document is really important document, and we're really fortunate to have this tripartite license agreement in Edmonton. As I said earlier in my speech this morning, I went to Montreal and had a chance to speak at a national conference, and folks were so amazed that there was a shared land use agreement in place with the city of Edmonton for neighbors and neighborhoods. It is remarkable. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean that it comes with its own set of challenges. But we're here today to try to help interpret some of those and ensure that we can answer some of the questions that might come up for you.
Right. And it's a very timely to talk about this, because we are just in the initial stages of renewing the tripartite agreement. So the last agreement was signed in 2012, and it expires on December 21st, 2021. It took 2 years to negotiate the new agreement last time, so we're on our way.
We're on our way. So, and just on that note, I do have, everyone should have received a letter from the Tripartite Engagement Working Group of the EFCL. If you didn't, please fill one of these out and put your name of your community league. We're trying to sort out how leagues want to be engaged about what they see are the changes that need to happen with the tripartite going forward. So I'll just leave these up here and grab one and fill one out on the way up. So we'll jump right in. So the city, as I mentioned already, the city sets aside land for leagues through the Municipal Reserve Land Act, right? The Municipal Reserve Dedication. So it's land that's acquired from the developer. So some of you that are in newer leagues, or newer neighborhoods, I should say, if you don't have a tripartite, often it's because the developer hasn't finished with the land or hasn't passed the land back over to the city. The MGA outlines the legislative requirements for the use of the land. So there are things in here that, although we may want to change, we might not be able to because they are legislated under the Municipal Reserve or Municipal Governance Act. And the MGA is a primary provincial legislation that governs municipalities in Alberta and sets out the legislated roles and responsibilities. So the community league facility footprint is identified in the neighborhood structure plan. So a general location is on the designated park site within the neighborhood. So you have your municipal land that the neighborhood or the developer has identified. Perhaps there's a school on there, and in conversations with the league and the city, that's how you identify where your licensed land will sit on that municipal land. New park development is initiated through a site development plan that identifies the preliminary community league site. Right? It's 0.8 hectare.
Roughly. It
Point
sort of
of
depends
hectare.
what the configuration of the land is, and they're trying to fit sports fields and whatever else on there. So it's sometimes a little bit bigger, sometimes just a smidge under.
Yeah, and I guess accordingly, in some years, facilities have exceeded the size of the 511 square meters that they kind of allow for on that land too. So Community League requests the establishment of the league site, and once the site is formally requested, right, by the league to the city, the league requests that of the city. They establish a tripartite license. You all have the generic one, right? And there is one of these for every league. And I don't know, Chantal, are there differences between each one?
They're essentially the same. There
Right.
are a couple that are
minor.
slightly different. Yeah,
There you go.
just one or two. Yeah.
But in order to license the land, the league and the city and the EFCL have to sign this, and it comes into play, and then that's where you start from.
So the tripartite license agreement grants to the community league non-exclusive use of the land. So what that means is the non-exclusive part means that the city with not less than 90 days notice can come onto the property if we need to do an inspection of something. It also means that the property, either on the land or inside the hall, can't be delegated to somebody else for their exclusive use. So it's community leagues, buildings and land are for the community, in the community, and so we can't restrict access. So the tripartite agreement is required for community leagues to use city land and to construct facilities. And it outlines the obligations of all three parties. Currently, there's 130 leagues that have tripartite licenses with the city. Now, there's about 160 leagues, so some leagues don't have a tripartite license yet, either because they're new and the developer hasn't handed the land back to the city, or because they haven't asked for one, because they're not ready to do that yet. There are a few community leagues that don't have halls, and they operate, for example, out of a recreation center, just renting some space from the city. And the tripartite, as I mentioned, is expiring, and all tripartite agreements will expire on that date, regardless of whether they were signed 10 years ago, or if you're a new league that just signed a tripartite, it will also expire at the same time. So yeah, the current term is of the tripartite agreement is a 10-year term, and this is on page 6 in your tripartite example here. It's Article 3, and the history of this is that in 1991, the first agreements were signed with a 5-year renewal clause, and then changes to the Municipal Government Act in 1999 made it necessary to renew that agreement. So that was done in 99, again with a 5-year renewal clause. And it was renewed in 2011 and agreed to a 10-year term at that time.
So, this is just some of the goodness that is in the tripartite agreement. There is a lot. So we're only going to focus on a few pieces. This is a large agreement. It does have a lot of pieces in it, but as Chantil said, there are definitely pieces that most leagues have concerns or questions about, and that's what we want to focus on today. So these are the areas that we're going to highlight. The use of the site, which is page 7 and 8, and I'll keep reminding you as we go through this. Construction and facility operation, assignment, bookings, rental, sublicense. For those of you that were in my programs group, the one before, right, that's falls into this one. The map, right, identifying the licensed area, which is Schedule A at the very back. And then default and termination, which is never one that we really want to talk about, but it is a piece that's really important to make sure you understand as well under this agreement as well.
Did you say that this type of agreement with the land and that is it unique to Edmonton?
It's very unique. There's
no other province or cities.
Even
or
Calgary doesn't have a tripartite license agreement. Yeah. So it's what's that?
Nationally, there's nothing like it in.
That I know of.
Yeah.
There are community associations, and it's the land piece that's unique, right? It's actually having access to land that is designated just for the neighborhood. So whether you build a rink or a hall or a gazebo, right? I mean, that is up to the neighbors to come together and build that on that licensed land. Or build nothing at all. I mean, that's your choice too. So, yeah, it is unique. And so, although sometimes it can be our headache, we have to remember that this is really unique, and we're really fortunate to have land, like have a space. When I was in Montreal, this group just sort of took over land, and then there was all sorts of problems because the city said, well, you can't just take that land, this is city land, and then they were always getting in a battle, and anyway, we don't have to have those battles. It's good.
It is good. Yeah, we are quite the envy of people across North
Yeah.
America. I've been to various conferences, yes, across the states. They can't
Yeah.
believe it, what we have here. And not just the land, but this incredible community-based infrastructure where there's places for people to gather, recreate, socialize, and have those important local conversations.
Yeah.
So just talking a little bit about the use of the site, and this is on pages 7 and 8 of your agreement. So the city remains the owner of the parkland, but grants a license to the community league. And the wording of this is probably something that we should strengthen in a new version of the tripartite agreement. So the agreement stipulates that the use of the building and lands are for recreation purposes and cannot be used for any commercial purpose. So, because that would be like subsidizing a private business. It also requires that if a community league wishes to grant long-term use of space, even to a not-for-profits, that the league requires permission from the city to sublicense that property. And the whole reason behind that is to make sure that one organization doesn't have exclusive use of space in perpetuity, because we want this to remain open to different people and different activities over time.
And I think the key there is the exclusive.
Exclusive.
You know, if you had a play group or a preschool that decided, geez, we'd really let you have a small hall. You have that bigger one over there, but you have that small one, and that would be just perfect for our play school group for the next 5 years. What's now happened is if they don't have it as a pack up every night, right? So some groups will do that, but they pack it up every night. If they just take over that small hall. If, you know, Martin wanted to host a chess club night in the small hall, now he can't. So now it's inhibited the neighborhood from using the space that's been allocated by the province, by the city, for neighbor use. So that's why it's so important that if you have a group and your board says, geez, we'd really like, gosh, that small hall is making us no money, we're losing money on it, and no one ever rents it, you have a conversation with your NRC. You have that conversation about sub-licensing your space. It's not that you can't, it's just that you have to get permission to, because it's not technically in the spirit of what is intended in that space.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good example of the play schools and preschools, because those are not education as per the Education Act. So those are permissible in a hall, but we can't allow education, like a private school, into a community league hall. Education is a responsibility of the
What about
province.
a church or a ministry?
A church or a ministry is fine, but again, it's about that exclusive use. And so if the user you can even have like a long-term use arrangement with an organization, and if they're packing up their stuff at the end of their use so it's available for other people, that's fine. What we're really concerned about is somebody who needs to leave all of their equipment or whatever it is there that prohibits the community from using that space for its original intent. And the other thing about creating a sublicense with an organization is that the sublicense can't go any longer than the tripartite agreement goes. So if you have a sublicense with somebody, that expires at the same time that the tripartite does and could be renewed when a new one is negotiated.
So yeah, so recreation is defined and it's defined actually in the tripartite on page 5. I'm sorry, we're kind of bouncing back and forth here, but page 5 actually defines recreation as recreational sports, social, community, and cultural facilities and programs. The intention is that the space can continuously be used. Each group packs up after the time. Commercial purpose is any commercial, retail, business, or merchandising activity or undertaking, profession, trade, occupation, or any activity providing goods or services carried out on the site or any portion thereof by a for-profit entity. And that's the key, is the for-profit entity as well. So construction and facility operations. This is on page 9 and 10 of your agreement. So the league will not permit to be added or remove from the site new, extended, or added facilities. Right? You can't add on a bathroom or a skate shack without consulting with the City of Edmonton. And that goes through your NRC. That would be the conversation that you would have, and you would have to go through the process with the City of Edmonton around your project that you want to build. However, if you're changing something like the countertops, or you're putting in a new fridge, those sort of things are fine. Those don't need to go through the city. The provision of, right. Right, so it doesn't include interior and non-structural. Anything that's non-structural doesn't need to go through the city. It does say, though, that the league is responsible to pay for the construction of any all new facilities, and that's Article 6, which I don't think should surprise many of you. And that relates to the connection of the utility services. Now, I know lately that has come up a few times with leagues around the utilities, especially around the rinks and water. So on section 6, it says the city shall provide the necessary funding for the initial installation on a one-time basis for connection of the storm sewer, the sanitary sewer, the water, the service, the gas, power, telephone service, and they will cut the grass on section B and maintain the trees and the plants. However, if you're going to be doing any new, I think this is 8, the league may be requested by the city to remove some of the facilities on the site. The league will be responsible for all costs of removing any facilities, restoring the site to condition that was existing prior to the construction. So the city will help to connect everything initially, right? So if you're a new league and you're looking at, they'll help with all of that. Anything that's changed ongoing, I believe, is the responsibility of the league. And then inspections. Sorry, there's a lot of notes on this one. There's some inspections, so if the league has to permit the city reps to come onto their licensed land, but the city will give you 96 hours notice to the league to come and inspect. If there's a concern about some of your connections, if there's a concern with your facility, that's been flagged. And they'll come to inspect the facilities or any improvements under construction in your facility to ensure that they're being developed and maintained in the manner provided in the license. So you can see, again, this is a dance between two, with the City of Edmonton, right? The league has a lot of authority to do some of this stuff, but there's a lot of process that the city puts in place that's important for the public safety and the public good to make sure that it's done appropriately. Okay, so here we get into rentals and bookings again. So what's the difference between assignment and rentals and booking? So page
15?
Page 15 of your tripartite has some definitions there. Let me do this.
Right, so here again, leagues require written permission from the city to assign the license to another party or to sublicense any part of the site. So in Article 34 there, it says the league will not assign this license or grant a sublicense of all or any part of the site without first obtaining written permission from the city, which permission may be withheld if the purposes of the proposed assignment or sublicense are contrary to the objective of the league. And the objective of the league is really like the purpose of community leagues, and it goes back to that social and recreational stuff.
So then again, rentals or bookings, right? We talked a little bit about one-time or short-term rentals. You don't need any permission from the city for. This is your building, this is your facility, this is your licensed land. Any activities that are occurring on the site need to be activities of the league. This is going back to your point, right? Or other not-for-profit organizations or community groups for the purpose of recreation. Recreation can be defined pretty broadly. And then we're getting into sublicense again, right? So sublicense and sublicensee.
Right. So there is a process in place for leagues to request consent from the city to sublicense. So again, your NRC will work with you on that process. So sublicense, page 5 in your copy of the tripartite here, is any license agreement entered into between the community league and a third party for use of space on or within the site, which is subject to the terms of the license agreement. And that's where, the play schools, the karate clubs that tend to
Recreation,
fall.
yep.
Yeah. A third party or not-for-profit organization that has entered into a sub-license with the community league is your sub-licensee. And the sub-license grants them regular and continuous access to your site to provide whatever program or service they're providing. And again, it's in the agreement, it's very broad. You know, the questions that you ask, like, is the devil is always in the detail here. And that's the value of keeping it broad, is it gives you that local autonomy, but also the challenge of trying to make sure that we're aligned.
Okay, so this is what many of you would have, and I'm sorry I don't have one attached, but often on the tripartite is a attachment of your licensed land. So it would have the picture of the Parkland, and then in sort of identified your licensed area. So this would be on your tripartite, and that's why it's so important that each of your organizations, that you each know where this is, in your record somewhere, so that you know where your licensed area is, so that when you decide to build your gazebo, you know exactly where it can fit. Okay. The part that is a little bit more difficult, but important nonetheless, is page 16 to 18, which talks about default and termination. So there are situations that can result in default or termination of the license. Whether you fail to initiate and continue a reasonable program of repairs after inspection, notice of deficiencies by the city, you need to keep your building up to date. And that's why we were talking a little bit about what is the league responsible for. So anything that sits on the licensed land, the league is responsible for the upkeep of that. If you fail to use the use of site for the purpose agreed to in the license, which goes back to the recreational opportunities for your neighbors. City determines that all or any part of the site is required for some purpose other than recreation. I can speak to that, but that is in there. And then time periods identified for specified circumstances. So, for instance, many of you might host City of Edmonton summer camps in your league. So the city has the ability to approach, and it needs to do this in a certain way, obviously, but approach the league and say, we'd really like to host a camp here. Sometimes the EFCL will contact you and say, we'd really like to host a meeting at your league. Because we're all partners in this, the intention is to share that space for specified circumstances and within reason, of course.
Does that include green chalk?
The green check technically is on Parkland, right? But they will always ask if they can use, bathroom facilities. So again, that does fall into that same piece as well. Yeah. So just, I guess, on this piece too. So 10 years ago, when this was renegotiated, the folks from the EFCL that helped to renegotiate it said, we're aware that a lot of our buildings are starting to fall apart. Like, this is a problem. And so they hired Stantec to go around and do assessments on all of the buildings. Every single one of them. So we have assessments that are 10 years old on your community hall. If you are not familiar with your assessment, please contact the EFCL and we can get you that assessment. It is 10 years old, and I would hope that in those 10 years you have done repairs to your building. So also, I know there's some little smirks, 10 years ago when they renegotiated the tripartite, that was why we have the CLIP grant. So the EFCL said if we're expecting leagues to continue to update their facilities, they need to have some money that's allocated specifically for the infrastructure. And so that's why the CLIP grant was created, and that's why we want that CLIP grant to be used to its fullest extent.
As do we.
Yeah.
There's a lot of investment in these assets across the city, and it's really important to preserve that.
So again, that is money, and it's quite a bit of money, two and a half million.
Yeah, it was a chunk.
$2.5 million that sits in the CLIP grant.
In the CLIP grant.
Yeah.
Yes, and NRCs, we monitor this, and they start beating the bushes every year if it looks like if the amount won't be fully expended.
Because we don't want money not to be expended, because then we'll lose it, right? And so we need to make sure folks
it doesn't carry over.
Yeah, we need to kind of keep going. So
there is in the default and termination,
Right.
under certain circumstances specified in the license, the EFCL may assume operation of the facility.
Right.
And this is if there's no board members. If the league itself becomes defunct, then the EFCL, under the terms of this agreement, takes over operation of the community league. And in fact, we did have a situation where this happened a few years ago. And I recall that at the time, there was a lot of nervousness in the community because if the EFCL can't operate that hall over the long term, then the city needs to do that. And so the angst was that the city might take this building and then the community wouldn't have their own building. And I really want to assure people that is not the case. I said before, community league buildings are in the community and we want the communities to have them and to operate with that autonomy. So if such a situation is happening, please, please, please talk to the EFCL and your NRC and let us help you with that sooner than later so we don't get to that point. We really want to keep those assets in your hands.
But there have been, like recently, we had one league who reached out last year who said, we're down to 2 board members, our membership is at 20. So as EFCL staff, we spent a Saturday and we hit the neighborhood and we went and sold memberships all day. And we did that for the league. And we talked up the league, we invited them to the AGM, and now they're doing fine. So it's those sort of we don't even want it to get to that point, but sometimes it gets to that point and it happens kind of quickly. So that's what the EFCL is here for. You're a member of our organization and we're here to support you with those things. Yeah. So we'll have just a few more minutes. I just want to make sure. So we've kind of gone over a few things. So common questions, right? So can we rent our facility to a business to run classes? Right, so again, this is about for-profit or not-for-profit, right? So we want to make sure that the business is not-for-profit that runs any classes. The community league may arrange for a business to provide goods or services for an activity. Like if you want a food vendor at a community league carnival or event, you want to hire a food truck, that's okay because it's a community league event. Some activities require permissions from the province or the city, right? If you want to do raffles, fireworks, those sort of things. And there's all sorts of questions that you can ask renters before you rent to them, just to make sure, right? So who's responsible? What's the purpose of the activity? Who's the intended audience? How are you making money off this event? Those are some of the things that you can ask.
A related question is that a nonprofit organization wants to use our facility on an ongoing basis. Can we do that? And again, it might be possible, but here's some good questions to ask. Is the group a registered not-for-profit? Are they in good standing in the societies? What activities will they be doing? Are those activities aligned with the purpose and intent of community leagues? How often would they be using the facility? Number of days in the week, number of hours of the day? What are their program hours and the actual hours that they would need to have the hall for their exclusive use? And do they require on-site storage? Would other groups be able to access the building at the same time? And again, EFCL or your NRC can help you with this. And I'm going to interject one additional question that we have recently been asked, do we need to get a Parkland permit for an activity on licensed land? And the answer is, if there will be 50 or more people, then yes, you do, even on your licensed land. And that's to manage liabilities. So some people thought that they didn't have to on licensed land, but if you have a large enough group, you do.
And that's because you likely don't have a fence between your licensed land and your parkland. Am I correct in saying that, Shanti?
Yep, so people just flow.
People don't know that this is their licensed land and this is the parkland, and so it's that drift between, right?
We recently did have a not-for-profit group approach us, and what they wanted to do was have a food truck that would travel around to specified locations in the city, and they're selling food at deeply discounted prices for neighborhoods where income levels are lower. And we went through this same situation, and we just pulled together a bunch of people from within the city. We had people from business licensing and vending licenses and Parkland, and you know what? We made it happen because it's a good thing for communities, and so that's what we'll.
But, you know, we are going to be engaging with all the leagues around what you want to see change in the tripartite agreement. One of the things that we'll be putting together, because I'm aware that there are some leagues that have all new folks or people that maybe aren't very familiar with this tripartite, or you're communicating with members, or so we'll put together a bit of. I'll probably use the basis of it, this presentation itself to provide that information to leagues to make sure they understand the rationale, the background, the history of the agreement, and then with that lens, think about what you'd still like to see changed and different to make, because what we're interested in is making your operations as easy for you with the intention of the agreement, right? So that's a piece. Okay, so yes, just last thing, we've already covered on this. So thank you, everyone. We have to wrap it up at this point. Lunch is downstairs now, and thank you. Thank
Yes,
you,
thank
all
you
of
so
you,
much for your
so much.
good question.